King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts. Here we are, episode 156 of the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for being here with yours truly, King of Podcasts. Starting off the new year, we're going to go into identifying what 2021 is going to be for all of you. Now, before I start with the program, a couple of quick notes. First of all, I'm going to be interviewing Jamie Rodriguez. Okay. And Jamie, I spoke with a few months back. He is a former music journalist and an ex-music personality, or photojournalist rather, ex-radio personality, and he's now the host of the JRodConcerts Podcast. You can learn all about that. The website is JRodConcertsPodcast.com. Again, JRodConcerts with an S, podcast.com. And also you can find him on Facebook and Instagram and everywhere else you find him on social media. And again, music journalist, concert photographer, worked in Miami at a top 40 radio station, WHYI Y-100, with the perennial heritage radio station there in the mid-2000s as part of their morning show. His podcast is a popular rock podcast, and he talks to a lot of different celebrities, a lot of different musicians from various walks, and it's an interesting podcast all alone. So we bring that up to him, and we talk about that throughout the show. So with that said, we'll have that coming up a little bit later on. Part one, my interview with Jamie Rodriguez here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Now, I know that in every industry rag I've been reading in the last couple of days, and this week alone, yes, politics are front and center. A lot of people want to talk about it. I'm one of those people that do not. Now, of course, I'm a gaming kind of person. You know, I watch this kind of stuff as a kind of a sport. But obviously it's never been fun. And I just think that, people do care. It's somewhat important. But as far as I'm concerned with this program, and I'm going to make this perfectly clear for all of you out there, and I've made a point of this in the past, since I started this show and any program I've done since 2012, okay? All my comments and opinions are apolitical. My thinking is independent and free thinking. I don't play to one side or the other. That's not for me to talk about. I don't want to concern myself to seeing the divide, the split, and where people feel they're in the political spectrum. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to worry about it. I don't care about it anymore. Just don't. Now, here's where I'm coming from. Because what we see now is a divided society. There's not even a question of that. However we got here, it wasn't 5 years. It was more decades ago. Okay? And there's always been times where this country has always had some kind of a divide. Let's just say it like that. With that parameter in place, okay, there is a thing where media and entertainment are directly involved. They're affected. That is why I went ahead and titled the episode today. This episode is how the new culture class created the media mainstream split. This is where I've learned right now in the last few weeks that I think I've been able to identify it very clearly. Now, when I've explained this to a couple people, this is how I explained it. You all remember the sequel to Back to the Future, Part 2. Okay? Doc Brown is there with Barney McFly in the laboratory in the alternate universe that Biff Tannen had created because he had the sports almanac, right? The alternate 1985. Well, that's what's going on right now. We have a normal, the traditional, conventional, corporate, mass consumed mainstream. That is right there. Now, both mainstreams are mass consumed. That's not a question. But the difference is who is watching content that's being forced upon them and being created where it does have a political slant. And it has some things we don't care about. We just want to be entertained. Well, that mass-produced mainstream comes from the corporate entities. The large media conglomerates, whether it's entertainment in movies, television. Then it goes to the news, because remember, all these media conglomerates have to have a news division, have to have something else. They're all intertwined. And they all now, for the most part, have their own streaming outlets. And so they are transitioning over, but there are certain things that will not transition over well due to the digital disruption. And so that takes away from things, creates the split. The split is there's an organic, viral, mainstream that goes across that the corporates are trying to tap themselves into. They're trying to find their way there. But it's been created. Now, some people might want to call it the culture war. I don't want to use that word. I mean, I know it's there, but there's a story I'm going to be pulling up real quick, and I'll tell you why. That talks about culture war. It's a culture clash. There's a clashing of cultures. And it is directly affected by, in the same way content creators need to understand this as well. Content creators, viewers, listeners, it goes the same way. There is a level of mass consumed product, right, that corporate companies create. That is network and cable television. That is your newspapers, your magazines, your large-scale publications. That's what they are. With large newsrooms, with large resources, with lots of money in the coffers. And for the longest time, that has been the establishment. But of course we see, especially in radio, it always works so well. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the evolution of radio, where one radio station in a market is the establishment, and then it will get replaced. Things move on. Trends change. Things evolve. That's what happens. That's what's been happening here in the last 25 years of the internet. The digital disruption. And this disruption now is full scale. It's full circle. Because 2021, we are going to see now, streaming is now a part of everyday life. Much like how smartphones became part of everyday life over a decade ago. And that's where we are now. Now everybody has to have, just like they have a smartphone, now almost everybody needs to have a streaming service and a way to stream. So whether it's a Chromecast, Amazon Fire Stick, a Roku, your smart TV, you have a way to do it now. So television and the way to watch on television has caught up to the smart devices. We have lots of options there and lots of services to consume, free and otherwise. And in some cases, some of these corporate companies have found a way to tap into what is there. But again, they're taking content that was viral in the past and repurposing it to then draw them to other mass consumed content of theirs. That's the idea. Or those corporate entities are recreating, rehashing content as familiar to people, putting that back out there for people to go ahead and come back to them so that when they have other projects coming up, they'll remember, well, remember we brought back Ghostbusters. We're the ones that brought back Marvel and DC and this and that. You know, we're the ones that, you know, that's the idea. Oh, look, we're bringing back, you know, another sitcom. We're bringing back Fantasy Law. We're bringing back Night Court. We're bringing back LA Law. This is the thing. Then you have the corporate size of the artists in music that have their own music. And then they also have, if you're following them, they might have messages when it comes to social, cultural, political messages out there that, you know, if you're following and you're listening to their music and you become a fan, then you can also follow their narratives because they're going to speak their mind and you're going to listen to what they're saying. Okay. And that's what happens too. And that goes on both sides of the spectrum, from a Taylor Swift to a Kanye West. It's just the way it is. But again, we look at it, and some of us in this audience that consumes all this content, you know, we're the ones that enjoy independence. We like independent content. We like content becomes organic and becomes something that just becomes a fan favorite. It becomes popular because it just becomes popular. Okay. Radio had an idea where they had the mainstream format, top 40, and then they had a crossover format. Things that would cross over into the mainstream. So those are your mainstream. That's your mainstream split. There is the mainstream of corporate establishment content. Then there is the crossover. things that come from social media, things that come from other entities like streaming, other areas of the digital disruption, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. That's what we're finding now. It's clearly defined. It really is now. This year, more than ever. And that's what's happening. And I know for myself, there's a difference between when I'm going to go ahead and watch, if I'm going to go ahead and watch something on YouTube, if I'm going to watch something on TikTok, if I'm going to watch something on Facebook Live or Instagram, there's all that. And then there's the side that has, then there's all the stuff I have on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime and things like that. And then for music, we're not going to the radio stations. That's the establishment model. That's been failing. But again, the establishment needs to be rebuilt. And then obviously, once these major companies, if they have to unload some of their assets because they are holding on to them and they're not performing with them and they underperform, either they take them down, throw them away, or they have to revamp them. Cable's hemorrhaging with so many different channels that were counterculture, that were crossover culture. That's changed. We don't have that. We don't have those entities now in the mainstream. It actually happened in the mainstream. There was a time where that was allowed, but now it's clearly defined. There is a split. And the split is because of a culture war or culture clash. Because we have people, you're trying to satisfy entertainment and media for different audiences. Now, it's not liberal or conservative. No. It's not libertarian. No. No, there are people that they'll embrace some of that large-scale mainstream, that establishment mainstream, or they will prefer to be in the crossover mainstream because we like to have our eyes open. Again, we are, in the world of media, we're artistic, we're creative. We like different things, different stories, different visuals, different aesthetics, different voices, different stories. That's what it is. Now, news doesn't offer that. Neither does politics. There's nothing special or new about that. These are things that have been going on since government was ever created. And there's nothing sexy or fun or interesting about government. There's just not. Remember, people want to go ahead and sensationalize and, glamorize Washington, D.C. or London, or wherever you might say for a political capital. There's nothing to glamorize about it. There's nothing special about it. Nothing appealing about it, really. We consume that content, some of us out there, because we want to be informed. But again, you have to understand that the big corporate entities that are out there, they're trying to make $1. So again, you're getting free content, but then you're also getting something else with it. And you can believe it or not, and you can accept it or not. And then there's so much other content because of the digital disruption where there's other information and journalists. We talked about Substack last week, where you can go there and follow along and find out. So we have other places to go for our content that crosses over into the mainstream, or there is content that will cross over into the mainstream. That secondary mainstream, that alternate mainstream, that is welcome to everyone. But no politics, no social justice, none of that here. We don't need any of that. We want to be entertained, informed, educated. That's it. We don't want a narrative, an agenda, or propaganda involved. We don't need it. It's not necessary. That's what's important. And I think that's something that needs to be clearly defined. And that's what we're seeing right now. So what matters to me is not the same old, go along to get along type of mainstream content that we've been accustomed to for a long time. Because in certain mediums, right, radio and television, they had it a certain way. But what happened was the digital disruption changed everything. When you don't have physical units to control the buying public, right? Music the same way. When you don't have those units, particular widgets, actual units to go ahead and buy for the public to buy. So you can control the price, you can control the content, you can control the amount, and when you want to distribute it. Now, it's endless. It's timeless. You can get whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. And you can get it at a premium price. No commercials, no crap, no agenda, no narrative. And now, do we get certain narrative and social, cultural, political content in those areas of digital disruption? Absolutely. But we are able to determine what there is. We're not subjected to it because that's all there is, or that it has to be forced down our throats. We have a choice if we want to consume that or not. That's what we all want, is a choice. Now, here's the thing. One thing that's more important than anything else is that, look, government has a sense of power. They have a sense of, there's a way that things are handled. And so, there's obligations that need to be met by citizens that are governed, right? You pay your taxes, whatever it is for property or for your own things. You pay for insurances that you need to be required, whatever the things that are required under law. And the governing bodies can do that. Okay, fine. But then the thing is, after that, we just want to be left alone. Let us live our lives. Let us have our vacations. Let us have our libations, our vices. And just live life without any kind of control. And without needing to go and have the room manipulation. Okay, I understand now. These days, people that want to talk about free speech, like I have, okay, and I've always talked about that. So we understand that there's various areas that are very sensitive. And you know what? They're going to come with ridicule. But again, if you want to be a part of that, go right ahead. But, I can understand that there are certain things of free speech that people now have made clear that, there's certain things that should be not acceptable. And if there's not enough blowback about it, or nothing to be done about it, then, it's what it is. But the good news is we have, again, a large-scale mainstream that will say, hey, don't do this with free speech. You can't say this, you can't do this. But then the alternate mainstream, which means if you don't like the social media that's out there that feels like a cesspool, and you don't like what's being said, and you can't comment, and maybe you're being censored for whatever reason, some of you out there, okay? The idea is there are new platforms being built out. There are websites. There are places to go. There are other villages to go to lend your voice or to be heard somewhere else. So the idea of wanting to be heard in that large-scale mainstream, well, you either have to play ball or you don't. But it doesn't mean that you can't get your voice heard and you can't get your story shown and you can't make something of a success of yourself because the crossover mainstream is accepting. And that's when things can get to the top. That's what you got to understand, is that people should want to be in that alternate, that crossover mainstream, the organic, people made, not corporate made, not by a suit in a large ivory tower. No. We want somebody that's, that can accept things from everyday people, and everybody can be consumed in it. And just leave your norms at the door. Like, for a while, take a break. Take a break from politics. Take a break from social justice. Take a break from any other cultural, political correct norms that you need to have. Take that out. Escape. Enter a different stream of consciousness and enjoy some entertainment and enjoy some media. Laugh a little. Cry a little. Be informed and think a little. Learn something. What's wrong with that? And we can do all of that in this mainstream right here, the crossover. And I keep using my hands to do this, and none of you can see me right now, but I'm using the upper part of my hand as the higher level of the large-scale mainstream, and then I put my hand in the middle as the crossover. But that's the best way for me to explain it, is how radio works. There was a reason why, and this is a great example. I keep talking about all the time about the Billboard Hot 100. The representation of all music and all styles of music and different voices, different cultures, different locations, all of it. A well-represented kaleidoscope of sounds and music and people. As we said, going from the late 80s, where things in the mainstream were very much, kind of in the same boat. You had a large-scale mainstream, so when it came to music, the Michael Jacksons, the Janet Jacksons, the Princes, the Madonnas, they were all, at Whitney Houston's, they were all in that large-scale mainstream. And you had certain record companies that were able to go and bring stars up to the forefront. And then everything else had its own different areas. So soul music, or black music, you could say, or Hispanic music, or country music had their own lanes. And they ran concurrent. But in the 90s, we saw a change. Rock became much more prominent. And certain acts came up and bubbled into the mainstream. And crossed over. But at that time, the main crossover and mainstream and crossover could actually be together. So there were times that the crossover, something would actually cross over into the mainstream and be acceptable in the mainstream. So when you had grunge music and the likes of Pearl Jam and Nirvana, guess what? You'd have MTV, a large-scale mainstream brand that would accept those acts. Then they would accept Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., and others, right? Then you would have this in the 90s where it started to change. But in the Billboard Hot 100 sense, or the America Top 40 countdown, which I always preface, they decided we're not going to use that countdown anymore. And remember, Tipper Gore, you remember the parents against all this stuff with the music? They had to put the explicit lyrics on there because they were trying to silence or discourage music that was crossing over into the mainstream. Well, by doing that, you only solidified it. You started establishing that crossover was the new mainstream, that it was the counterculture. And that you just can't, people are not just going to accept, okay, here, what's the next Michael Jackson song coming out next? What's the next, whatever, Huey Lewis and this, or the next song from Genesis. No, nobody was going to accept that anymore. No more ballads. They wanted to hear something that was different. So if it was dance, if it was rock, if it was rap, if it was country, that's what came up front. And so we had so much music that became mainstream and crossover mainstream. Country is there. Rap is there. R&B is there. I mean, that's what it is right now. And that's what we see. That's the divide we have. And the divide is in the content we consume. So for those of you that are content creators that listen to this program, now you understand where I'm coming from, that you need to be able to go and understand that there are two lanes of mainstream content. Social media is in the crossover. Some of it is in the large scale mainstream because there are certain channels designed by those large corporate entities with the purpose of having, just look at YouTube. YouTube has so many different, outlets of either corporate-owned entities of news, publications, or some other sites, magazines, and they all have their spot. And then they can repurpose them on television through a digital source. They can do that too. So they have that. But again, that's what's different here. Now, let me get into the story. And it's really interesting that I got this from a site it's attached to Walt Disney World. It's a fan site. It's called Pirates and Princesses. So this is an opinion piece that got put up. They didn't say who the staffer was, but the story is titled The Culture War and Its Effect on Entertainment Moving Forward. Now, I'm going to skip through all the political stuff they talk about, but I think there's a couple things he brought up here, or he or she brought up, that was actually interesting. And here's what I want to bring up now. Now, what does this mean for entertainment? This writer then says, I'm an entertainment writer who specializes in Disney, Walt Disney World, Lucasfilm, etc. The website is about Disney parks primarily. Does the continued culture war and strife make an already heavily damaged entertainment and tourism industry less likely to recover? How do you make a movie or a series nowadays when half of your viewers want traditional storytelling and the other half view it that as a relic of a flawed and hateful past. Entertainment is a war for the soul of the narrative that we should espouse, and nobody seems willing to compromise. Well, we don't need to compromise. That's the thing that needs to be understood here. It doesn't matter. I mean, at this point, the divide is a divide, and people are going to have a big difference, and that's the case. Now, he says he felt it was important to talk about the culture war, which you can read about it. I'll put the link right there on the web on the description for the show. That there's the culture war we've been witnessing in sports, entertainment, etc., breaking out into full-blown conflict. At some point, we need to start breaking down tribalism and treating every individual with kindness, both in our entertainment and in our nation. But the powers that be seem to not have deemed that worthwhile, and I fear the future for it. But that's what has to be understood. Whatever happens, we should always strive for that crossover to be there. Because if we only get what is a controlled mainstream, where nobody has any input or a say, then we'll have problems. I don't think we're going to get to that point. And there are other countries that also have their own issues. Listen, Britain's got their own issues as well. You know, Mexico and Spain, there's other areas. But again, entertainment and media, that's a money-making thing. So there's got to be something to be said about where people are going to go and step back and not be a part of it and just leave it be. And why is it important to follow along with what might happen with this? Well, because, you know, you're going to ask yourself what's going to happen when it comes to the growth of everything. We talked about the peak TV phenomenon and the number of shows that are coming out and what could change coming up going forward to satisfy the subscription streamers. We talked about that recently. And again, there are a lot of shows that are coming out with new episodes, and when we looked at things, we're now going to see a number of streaming services that are coming out. But here's the thing. You still have a choice if you want to go to Disney Plus or Peacock or Paramount Plus or Discovery Plus or Hallmark Movies Now or HBO Max, right? But then there are others that are not associated with any major corporate entity necessarily, even though they might be corporate. Right, Apple TV, but again, they're kind of their own thing, but they are a large entity, but at least they're offering a wide range of content. Same thing with Netflix, of course, which is a large independent. And because they're making the kind of money that they're making, and because of the subscribership they have, they might be able to go and stay right where they are. Amazon is alone their own kind of network. That's what they're doing as well. At one point, Google was going to be a part of the YouTube TV, but they dropped out. And so you have to just keep in mind that there's a lot there to be said about where it's still good because we still have the Wild West in streaming right now. And there's too much of a breakup right now when I still have people on cable and people on digital that right now all these major entities have to go ahead and satisfy both and service both. So they don't have a full control over one sector or the other. And that's a good thing. And that's going to take a while for that to change. So we got about a good decade before we figure out what happens next. But again, the internet, even if those streaming options get controlled and become like a mainstream, like a large-scale mainstream, and some of those other options are not there, someone else will take the place. Social media, believe it or not, there are other options out there that will come across if you don't like what you're on. And what's happening more than now ever is the idea that people will go ahead and opt to go to alternate sources for their content. However they like to go and go to a feed that looks at news or people's commentary or the Village Voice. People will go somewhere else to hear the people that are, or the content that's more like them. So that's happening. That's part of the divide. So that's what it is. couple stories I want to bring up before we go and wrap things up and go right into the interview with Jamie Rodriguez. Hollywood Reporter put out a story about mergers and acquisitions among the podcasting sources or the podcasting companies. Companies like Wondery, Stitcher, Megaphone, The Ringer, and Serial Productions have all become acquisition targets, and there's a boom in listenership right now for podcasting. So Amazon has bought Wondery, the makers of popular shows Dirty John and The Street Next Door. Capping a year of notable consolidation of the podcast industry. Some 104 million Americans listened to podcasts monthly last year, according to Edison Research and Triton Digital in their 2020 Infinite Dial report. And that's up from 90 million listeners in 2019. Amazon, citing the evolution of listener habits, said it plans to use Wondery's programming to help it expand the non-music selection available through the streaming service Amazon Music. As you know, we talked about how Amazon Music now has a podcast platform. And, of course, all of my programming is on Amazon Music, so you can look for it there. SiriusXM, also making their own push, bought producer and distributor Stitcher. So it's interesting, the consolidation right now in podcasting, much like it was back in 1986 through 2001 when it came to radio. Media entities being consolidated. But there's not enough money coming out of this. Keep that in mind. We're not getting a whole lot of advertising. And that's the other thing. It's just there's some, but it's, it's not enough to really satisfy everybody. So in the last 2 years, media tech companies have invested more than $1 billion to buy out podcast production and technology capabilities. But again, if you're doing podcasts, believe it or not, you can do it with low overhead, and you can do it with very good equipment. And again, it's an audio project. So it's not like you have to put a whole lot of money into it, believe it or not. Now, these days, I put a little more money into my projects, into my content here, and I do that. And I also did a lot of work when it came to, the websites I worked on. I did some work right now. The Broadcasters Podcast site, a little bit of tweaking. I have my personal site, which is my full portfolio of everything that I do, kingofpodcasts.com. And actually, I put a lot of stuff in there. And I actually have a lot of things where you can actually listen to all of my content in one place. It's a large podcast hub. The King of Podcasts radio network, if you will. Now, the industry has brought in slightly more than $700 million in domestic ad revenue. Many acquirers are betting that podcasting still has some growing to do as it continues to supply proven intellectual property to Hollywood studios and delivers results to advertisers. Now, the depth of engagement you get on podcasts is quite unique. IAB's VP of Experience Center, Zoe Soon, says that bigger brands have moved up ad spending to podcasts in recent years. It's a real indication of the confidence and strength of the medium. So that's good. But again, there's a whole lot of money there. And also, we're talking about money where you're paying cost per measurement. I'm in the same model because, I put a couple of breaks in between an hour-long show because I am trying to monetize it. And like I said, the monetization, I'm not necessarily just putting it in my pocket. I'm putting back into the show. Basically, this year and last year's ad revenue that I got, which is not, I'm not making super bank over here, but I decided to reinvest it in new editing software and new microphone to improve the quality of the program, which I've continued to do is always continue to improve. It's always what's important, especially when the materials are out there to go and create a quality radio broadcast. And all I got to do is do it from home without going into an actual studio. No, I made the studio at home. Home studio is great. And the other thing, too, most important, is you got to have quality. And that's the other thing, too, is that the crossover mainstream, a lot of quality programming. Sounds different, looks different, sounds good, looks good. We like those kind of things. It's very important to us. Now, one other story I want to bring up here, this is from Media Confidential, the Media Confidential blog, which I like to go through for a lot of different things, mediaconfidential.blogspot.com. It's really good stuff. So here's one thing I looked at, which was very interesting. Now, when you think about the fact that with all the news and the politics that were going on in an election year, 2020, regardless of the pandemic as well, the one thing you got to understand, and this is what's more than anything else, there's just not good business in it. And I don't understand this, right? That some of the larger news entities, they are doing things in order to make a profit. But instead of making a profit, they're getting hurt by a lack of profit and lack of circulation and lack of engagement. And because of that, and if you can look at the page, you can go and look at the link, okay? Click through and look at the graph that's on here, the quarterly job cuts comparison. Because you see where it's just an incredible amount of job cuts this year as a result of everything. Now, planned job cuts by U.S.-based companies jumped to 77,030, up 18.9% from month to month. Now, here's the thing. Announced newsroom cuts by digital, print, and broadcast news. So, the last time we saw numbers that were so significant of the amount of cuts of people in all these different news entities was the recession of 2008-2009. 14,000 were let go in 2008. 2009, 11,000. Last time we had something even significant to that was 11,878 in 2018. Now, this year, 2020 saw 16,160 digital, print, and broadcast news job cuts. Now, in the final months, this is from Senior Vice President of Challenger Grain Christmas, Andrew Challenger reports that companies may have survived the initial impact of the pandemic in March and April, determined staffing adjustments based on increasingly difficult market conditions. While some segments were up, such as warehousing, shipping, financial, and some manufacturing segments, many others were hurt, among hospitality, entertainment, and leisure. The media sector announced the highest job cuts on record in 2020. That's including TV, movie production, news, and advertising. 30,711 industry cuts. 201% more than there was in 2019. An increase. And 6% higher than the last recorded number of 28,803 in 2008. And this comes as multiple news organizations and TV news networks, including Fox News, ABC News, BuzzFeed, Vox Media, Vice Media, News, New York Post, Atlantic, Fortune Magazine, Tampa Bay Times, and New York Times announced layoffs across their news and business divisions as ad revenue took a big hit with the cancellations of major events, the closures of businesses, and the precipitous drop of ad spending. Well, maybe it's not so much that. Maybe it's more about the content is not resonating with the consumers. The included paywalls, maybe those are just not doing as well. There's a lot of things that have to be considered. And there you go. Not good. Not good at all. So now you have to understand, there's a whole thought process about, things are pushed for a particular narrative, but again, it's supposed to be about money making. And some of these large corporations, they could take a loss. And they do, and they have. But at some point, they're going to say, you know what? We just can't keep losing money like this. We need to continue to grow. And, our stockholders care. And those are the people that care. Maybe we don't care so much about the consumers because they're only spending so much money, but the shareholders are putting a lot of money into it. And if the institutional investors are upset, they have to make changes. And so the changes they made was not improving the content, but making cuts. That's the corporate thing to do. We know that very well. All right, we're going to leave it there. Move along right now to my featured interview with Jimmy Rodriguez. He's the host of the JRodConcerts Podcast. You'll hear the introduction and part one of my interview with him here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Let's give it a go. We're going to talk about radio. We're going to talk about music. We're going to talk about concerts with my featured guest. He's a music journalist and a concert photographer. And one of the reasons that really stood out for me when I went ahead and decided to book the interview and he reached out was he used to work at a station that I've listened to as a child all the way up to today. That's WHYI Y-100, the top 40 heritage leader since 1973 in South Florida. We'll talk about that here on the program. He was part of the morning show with Kenny Walker and Kenny and Footy, which was a part of a long line where the guy Footy, if you don't know his name, we're going to talk about him pretty extensively. We'll talk about that on the show as well. But what he does now is besides doing music and concert work, he's a popular rock podcast host, as well as a photojournalist. He works with South Florida publications such as the Miami New Times, Miami Music Magazine, and the Palm Beach Post. He hosts the JRodConcerts Podcast, and he joins me now. Jamie Rodriguez, welcome to the Broadcasters Podcast.
Thanks, Jorge. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, my pleasure. I really do appreciate it. So I want to start off and get your background on it because you were featured in a profile about you from WHYI, and I want to bring up what your background is so it gives a good bit of context before we get started. Now, the year was 2004, and during my freshman year at journalism school, I won a contest to attend a live Q&A with the Victoria's Secret Angels at our local top 40 radio station, Y100 in Miami. After the live session, which you talked to some of the angels, Victoria's Secret Angels, that's Tyra Banks, Adriana Lima, Giselle Bundchen, Heidi Klum, and Alessandra Ambrosio. Jesus, that's like the cream of that's the queens of Victoria's Secret.
Yeah.
You met the radio station's general manager. Was that Rob Roberts at the time or no?
Well, actually, it was Footy, who's still in the station. And not Footy, sorry, Froggy. It was Froggy, who was like a senior producer for the show.
Oh, for Elvis Duran. For Froggy, for back with Kenny and Footy. Sorry, I forgot how far back he goes. Right.
So it was, after the Q&A, Froggy was just around the hallways, and I was in journalism school, and it was like my freshman year of school. It was one of those things where everything kind of like aligned.
Mm-hmm.
I went up to him, introduced myself, and I just said, "Listen, like if you guys ever have an opening, like I would love to just be part of it." And he said, "Actually, we are in need of an intern." And right there and then, they set me up for like an interview in like a couple of weeks, and yeah, it was very quickly. It was great.
You worked in that big monstrosity of a building on Riviera Boulevard in Miramar.
Right.
The Clear Channel building it was back in those days before it's now iHeart. And you worked with Kenny Walker, who still is very prominent right now. He's morning radio over at 102.7 The Beach, WMXJ over in down the street in Hollywood. And Footy, who was John Cross, still very active today. I know with a lot of charitable stuff, but Footy going back to the 80s, working with the legendary, unfortunately, recently passed Sonny Fox. So he goes back 35 years plus. And then, it was Footy right before he decided to retire and hang up the headphones for good after he did a show over at WID. Because the thing was, he was still there, and then Kenny comes in, and it was like, I remember there was a lot of things that were changing, and that station at that time, it had gone through so many different changes. And now, first of all, before I ask about why, talk to the listeners about what radio meant to you coming in. Because you were coming into journalism and you had this radio opportunity. What was it like to jump into such a happening media environment like that station and just getting to, do this, be a part of that event, and how it brought you a chance to get involved in such a great environment right off the bat?
Yeah, sure, Jorge. Well, back then, and we're talking about February of 2005, which is a long time ago now. So, radio was still a very big medium. I mean, maybe iPods were around, but like that's it. Forget podcasts, I think YouTube was not even around just yet. YouTube came around in like 2007-ish or something like that.
Right. Well, podcasting, I can tell you for sure, I started doing podcasting August 1st, 2005. When I left Clear Channel, because I was still Clear Channel beforehand, and the iPod had not been invented yet. We were doing audio archiving in those days. Right.
So radio was still big. I mean, everyone was pretty much listening in their cars to either radio or CDs. That was still what was happening. And so Y100 was also a station that I grew up with, obviously, because it was like the cool station, right? It was the cool station, and the audience, was huge. It really felt like the entire South Florida area was listening. It was a very special time. It was great.
And the thing was, Napster and the peer-to-peer things were coming in. We were starting to be able to download music and download the MP3s onto an iPod or onto certain devices by that point. So the thing was, we were starting to get a little bit of that transition out of physical units of music. So not so much. But the thing was, radio didn't have online radio was still pretty primitive. So the digital disruption that was going on that we have so entrenched today wasn't as bad back then. So radio meant something back then. And, I just feel like there's a time where that station held on to an audience. The music was also it was favoring. And the thing was, you had a lot of good stations you had going up against Y100 at that time. It was still, the genres were so different. You still had alternative stations. You had a good mix-up of music. And radio was just different. And it was right at the time where Clear Channel had already made their foothold. And at that point, they had grabbed so many stations. But they had not basically changed all of them yet. They were still getting their foothold. So the corporatizing of all the formats, you still had some stations like Y100 that had had that big footprint, and they were able to go and do what they wanted to do. Like they could still run the gamut. Because I still remember, I don't think Tony Banks was there, but that was who I talked to. I tried to get a job over there back, I think 2004. I visited the building, and I tried to talk to him as music director to get a job there. But it was like it was for an on-air shift. I had never done on-air commercially. I'd done it in college, so. It was just to try to get in there, but it was nice to get in the door, go and talk to them, shoot the breeze. Because the thing was, too, is that the programming back then, it was adapted because at the time, iHeartRadio or Clear Channel, they still had a programming methodology similar to what the station in Tampa, WFLZ, had, which was very young, hip, good, solid, energetic jocks. It was the history of what Y100 was. And at that time, I think that's how the station really felt at that time. I forget, who was in the lineup at that time that you had that was right after Kenny and Footy in the Morning?
Right after us? Okay, there was, we had Michael Yo, but Michael Yo was in the afternoon. I want to say.
And was Jade Alexander still
Adam
there,
Baum.
or no?
No, that was before Jade Alexander. So it was, that was before Jade Alexander. It was us, Kenny and Footy in the Morning. Then it was Adam Baum.
Oh, that's right. He's still in Atlanta. It's doing pretty well, right?
He's in Atlanta, Adam Baum. And then he went to Michael Yo. And then he kind of went to the nighttime, the drive back schedule.
And also, the idea was also dance music was intertwined, I think, at that point after Michael Yo. I think that's when they started having the Club 100 stuff at that right time. Was that right? Or was that later on?
That's right. Yeah. That was around that time.
So the thing was, sure. But then again, that's what Y100's kind of stuck. They're one of the few stations that can still do that kind of thing, attachment to the Ultra Dance Music Festival, attachment to the dance music scene, and to all the different venues and areas, things like that. It's had that. But, I also feel like with Y100 now, it's kind of kept losing its identity. Like the one thing that always bothered me was they took the dolphin off the logo. And they changed it to like a wine, to the martini glass, and now it's it's just they just did some stuff that I didn't like, and also would change the station name a little bit, add the 0.7 at one point, then take it away. It's like it was always kind of tinkering with it, but the station survived. Do you like the way it is right now? I mean, even though it's some of the stations just don't have that, they sound like the same as anywhere else. Like most stations like Y100, you can hear that in any market, and it doesn't sound any different.
Yeah, exactly. I just, the industry has just changed so much, Jorge. Yeah. It's if there was little flexibility, and that was one of my inner complaints back then, if you will, is that there was very little flexibility with the song selection in a way. It was programming director. If you wanted to play, Gwen Stefani was hot at the time, so her two singles you could but you couldn't come up with a B-side of her album. You had to play the whatever, like there was predetermined song list that you could kind of play with.
And they were very much into saying, okay, a song is going to play 100 to 110 times a week, so you're going to play it every 90 minutes. At that time, it was the overkill. It was really, they were doing so much with the commercial inventory because they were running commercials like crazy. It was the less is more time. Remember that? And then they changed it. They would put so many commercials back in. So they basically were self-destructing themselves by what they were doing, and they were just making enough reasons for something else. When it comes along, it was going to come along, and then radio was going to lose its spot. I feel like it's happened that way. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that it's honestly, I love Y100 and I love radio, and there's something still special about it, something romantic about it, but I feel like really we're approaching 2021 and things are just so different. I think that people are really fragmented in what they like. If you like deep tribal house, you have a universe for you. If you like top 40, even if you like top 40, you don't even have to go to top 40 radio anymore.
No, and the one thing too, the market also doesn't match the area. The market, the radio does not match what the market represents at all. Mm-hmm. There is no rock music. There's a rock scene down there. Dance music, you have Revolution, which I'm sorry, in my opinion, listen, a great thing that this Italian owner decided to come in and buy a station and build the format. God bless him, but it doesn't fit what the current market is, because it kind of just, it will identify with the ultra music festival, and then it will just kind of just, it'll just kind of just do its own thing, but it doesn't really fit. And then the hip hop station, R&B station, there's still a foothold because Jerry Rush and the people there. There's some stations that still kind of have a little bit of identity left. That's why Hot 105 is still such a popular station.
Yeah.
When you have Easy,
Big 105 is still around and kicking. It's
man. But they also they've had some things where they also have struggled. Like for me, I'm a radiophile. I listened to radio when I was young, and you were the same way. But my thing is, personally, as a radio listener, I can't listen to the radio anymore. It's unlistenable. And it's a lot of reasons why I have that. But I wanted to know, do you still feel like you consume radio like you did when you were interning, or has that kind of taken away?
No, absolutely not. It's between my podcast and if I'm not doing research or listening to new bands or new stuff from the labels or whatever, I'm listening to Sirius XM, basically, to answer your question. Satellite radio, I think, was also kind of a game changer for people that wanted to just kind of like put something in the background in their car or something and not have to deal with commercials. I really don't listen to radio, like terrestrial radio, anymore.
So one of the things that kind of interests me about stations like Y100, and then I want to get into your work in the music and concert scene and your photojournalistic work. So, but I just think for me, it's nice to go and talk to somebody that worked in radio. Absolutely. Just because here's the thing, I don't want to. I'm bashing the corporate system, the system that came in and decided to micromanage everything. But the honest truth is, there are some amazing people that work at these stations. I know that now, and I've worked with some of those before, and so I don't want to disparage. But the thing was, I left iHeartRadio or with Clear Channel in 2005, and I was there for a couple of years. But I knew I didn't want to stay. I didn't want the environment where they were going to pay the same paycheck. They were never going to bump up. If you were there as an intern, listen, they get their interns from Connecticut School of Broadcasting or some other places, and they just make their money how they do. Fine. They get a little bit of a payday for getting interns on to bring them on board. Wonderful. But, there's a lot of things that are still there that I just, the fun has been taken away. And they just,
and I don't blame it. I don't blame it on the stations. Like, they were just trying to survive. And then, of course, iHeartMedia, which is, now a huge conglomerate, it started consolidating everything. All the stations around the country. Yep. It kind of became like Live Nation of radio in a way, like where everything was like part of like a big systematic machine. So, everyone's pushing the new Harry Styles because then that pushes the merchandise, because then that pushes the tour, and then Live Nation gets involved, and it's like it just became very mechanic, No,
and I get the model. And again, but they're just, in some ways, something like that have all the resources in one. The ad rep firm, to have the live concert arm, to have the promotional arm, to have the iHeartRadio app, which is the one thing I think is the true positive that company has. And I still don't know how they're able to buy anything. Like, I don't know if you saw that VoxNest just got acquired by iHeartRadio. And like, these guys are still $6 billion in debt. And they just got out of bankruptcy. They're still not hitting that good on the stock market, getting their IPO back up. I don't know how they're able to keep doing this and how they're allowed to keep doing it. But for me, I'm waiting for the day when stations like this will not be allowed to continue to run at such a deficit, and they'll have to implode. They'll have to unload their stations so that local programmers will buy. But here's what I want to ask you. So hit radio stations like Y100 Miami, when you were working there, have changed a lot. We talked about, and I've talked about how the digital disruption from how music is no longer sold by physical units to almost exclusively streaming. Now, you said you listen to Sirius XM. I'm a Spotify guy, and it just the Billboard charts are on there. When I want to be able to, and I'll talk about that in a moment, about the fact that, you know, the virality when the song is hot, to wait so long for a station like Y to play the song. Here's what I have now. Well, I'll explain it right now because actually it comes into my question. Because I've gone and I've actually prefaced a survey. There's a study from what I think was called the Radio Face. The idea was that it takes between 8 and 12 weeks for a song that makes the Billboard Hot 100. When the song is hot, and let me just say, back in the 80s and the 70s, Y100, they would play America Top 40 with Casey Kasem. And the chart they followed was the Billboard Hot 100. The songs they played were based mostly off of charts that were off the Billboard Hot 100. And they reported to Billboard their rotations of what they were doing, not media base, which is just some corporate conglomerate that Clear Channel owns or iHeartRadio owns, which is how it works. All of it works like that. Now, with that said, there are multiple hit music stations now in small markets because all the big stations, media base is the conglomerate. Program directors can't even talk to anybody right now. Music directors can't, they can have calls, but really, they're not in charge. It's regional directors from either Atlanta or New York or what have you, and they control what stations play what. And they'll say, okay, Taylor Swift has a new song, we're going to put it right to the top. Ariana Grande has a new song, put it right to the top. Oh, we're going to put, The Baby and Roddy Ricch Rockstar? Oh, no, we're going to wait about 10 weeks. 8 to 12 weeks, we'll wait for that. The song Mood, if it gets enough time, it'll finally make it way up there. But that's what they do. They want to always say, oh, it's because we want to, only the established, the bona fide hits are the ones that make to the station. But now some of these stations, and I like this, is the enterprise move they talk about. So they're right now, there are a few small market stations that have started to concentrate on keeping the station, quote, as current as possible with what's happening in real time. More influenced by streaming and sales than the national charts, the media-based charts, as well as soliciting new picks from listeners. The old day, hey, take a phone call, have a request. I want to hear this new song. That's how it used to be. Now, Sean Ross with RadioInsight.com, he says this. He calls the intent a new streaming era paradigm. Now, in a market where Y100 has two other stations now, Power 96 for whatever reason, another station I love for years, they've lost their way. They're playing the same music as CBS and now Entercom owned. It's just, again, they're playing the same songs together. There's a lot of times you hear the same songs on the stations at the same time. They're just programmed that way. Yeah. And they're doing the same old format, the same old way. And the same thing goes for 97.3 hits, WFLC. They're all playing for the same small, shrinking listenership. What are these stations missing out that if you were working there again, what were the things at Y100 that you saw going on that would make those stations relevant again? What are they doing wrong now?
Well,
regardless of the resources they have, the jocks, do you think it's the talent? Is it the music? What are some of the things you think stand out that could be quick fixes?
Well, I think that, and this goes all the way to many jocks, but there are some quality jocks out there that still do this. In my show, Mark Goodman from SiriusXM, he's the grade A of this. But you still have to give effort to listen to music. I believe that, right? If you go to the gym, or you have to go and put the effort, or read a book, you have to read the book, the hours. Music is the same. If you want to be on the cutting edge and have new sounds and just be on the lookout, you can't just put some backdrop, top 40 playlist and expect to be discovering or reading new stuff. And disc jockeys used to take this very seriously. There still are some. I like to think that I do. I like to listen to 14, 13 hours a day of music, but because you have to. Because then when you get on the air, you can tell your audience, like, this is what's up and this is why you should care.
I'll tell you what it is. One of the things I also work about, and they always try to talk about these radio industry types, personalities. Now, distinguishing factors for the people you got to work with when you were working at Y-100, Kenny Walker has an amazing voice, and that's why that guy is doing so amazing. Well at the beach, rather.
Still the voice of the Miami Dolphins, too.
Correct. And the thing is, resonating a likable voice, a comfortable voice that sounded good, that knew what they were talking about with their music. When I hear now the people they have on, you're hearing young voices.
Yeah.
They're trying to resonate and say, okay, we're not going to bring the people that have those great sounding voices that sound good on the air. That has been a drop tradition. That's not even an accolade that you need to have anymore. So to have a good voice to sound on the air, right, to talk about the songs, and actually care about the music, nobody's doing that. Like,
no.
I mean, God bless the young people that are actually coming on now that are doing it. But again, they sound young. They don't sound like they just sound like they're fans. They're not
right. And Kenny, and I learned so much stuff from them, and I will eternally be grateful to Kenny, forever, and Foodie, because they taught me things like, listen, Jamie, like, you have to, break it down to the audience. Like, break it down to, like, they can't see you, they can't see what's going on,
right.
So you have to tell the whole story, and you have to just go to the detail, like you're going to an elementary kid. Paint the whole picture. What's going on? What does it smell like? What's the color? What are you seeing? The whole thing. Because I used to go out on the field and do skits, so that was one of the teachings that I'll never forget from Kenny. So very, very descriptive, and from Foodie, all those legendary stories that he's seen it all. So always grateful to them, and they added that.
Now with Foodie, were you only there with Kenny and Foodie, or were you there with the Chicks at 6?
No, I never got to work with the Chicks at 6,
I still that's a gimmick.
Yeah.
Hell of a gimmick they did. Did you ever work with Vinny Perazzi?
No.
Okay, he was
a name floating around.
Right, because he was there during that show. And I didn't know. That was a guy I worked at Clear Channel with me. He worked at the Gator. I don't know if he's still there or not, but he was doing overnight work there for many years, and I worked with him, and he's a great guy. Awesome guy. Shout out to you, Vinny. So they don't want to do that anymore. So all the stations, that was what it was. And then the morning shows, the same thing you hear everywhere else. And a national show, which doesn't resonate. It doesn't matter if Froggy, who might have been attached to all the other morning shows before that, he's not in that much at all, but they think, that's all the local we need. We don't want to put a local morning show in. Mm-hmm. That went away. When you talk to people there in the community that might have still, they attached to knowing you from the working of radio, or people that you have in music, talk to me about the detachment of the fact that, like, musicians that come on board, they don't have a morning show to go to. We have to listen to Elvis Duran, and honestly, that show doesn't fit here. It's a New York show. And why they think it's going to work everywhere else, it doesn't.
Yeah. There was something special about our show, because it connected to the community. Yep. We could, but it had very high end production too. So it just felt, so it was like top of the line, but you could talk to people in Miramar or Davie or Pembroke Pines or whatever, and you had this like flow going, and you could talk about the Turnpike, and you could talk about the Palmetto, and make local references in a very high end, with all the resources way, with the best artists, with the best talent. We had P. Diddy going around the hallways one day. We had Alonzo Mourning coming the other day. David Copperfield would just show up. So it was natural. It was real. It wasn't fake, and you could feel that.
You had real stars. Like, and the thing was, they knew the stars that came into town. The local personalities. So, like, if Gloria Estefan wanted to come into the studio, or John Staccato or something like that, who knows?
Shakira,
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's moments that you heard. I mean, and also you had other local morning shows to go, because Paul Young Ron were still in its prime.
They were down the hallway. And I also very grateful to Paul, because I would go after the show or in between commercials, and I would learn a lot about music from them. So also shout out to them.
Oh yeah. Oh, Paul Casanova was great. And good that he's still working and he's still around. 'Cause I'm surprised he's stayed around as long as he has. Institution in that space, by the way. Going back to WSHE. Here's the other thing too. you notice that, and this is the biggest problem we have, is that in 2004, 2005, when you were there, we still had some of that old guard, the people that were not around for this corporatized type of thing. What held radio together was the people that were still there that had good long contracts. They were kind of tenured, and they weren't going to get pushed around. That's like, listen, you might be coming in here, you might be the new bosses, but I still know what the station needs. So Footy could claim whatever he wants. I mean, it's like for him, hey, they took him off of a Y-100 because, okay, he's too old for the format. All right, I understand that. And so, but like, you still got my contract. You still got to pay me. So like, okay, we'll put you on WIOD. We'll put you on for the rest of your contract there. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
Because, there's something to be said about respecting who was coming in. But before, when you have people that, Footy would remember the heyday of Y-100 when that was a number one station. And like, Miami Vice was the deal. And, everything was coming into play. Legendary. It was, I listened to the air checks of the days before all that.
Yeah.
Earl the Pearl and Tanner in the morning and like all the stuff, like the original start of the station. That station just always had that fire. And it's hard for a station to stay like that because some stations don't get to stay like that forever. But, 3 more years, that station's going to be 50 years old. Just saying, for me, it's a local attachment to that. And it's the epitome of what radio has become today. Because if you can't reach that new audience, you can't get the younger listeners. Honestly, to me, right now, there are certain artists that they should be attaching themselves to right now. You know who doesn't get any play at all is BTS. I don't know how much you follow the pop music at all, the newer pop music, but...
Yeah, I follow it.
So that group is like so globally powerful worldwide. And those people will go, the BTS army, which is, there's many in America, they will flock and they will attach themselves if they know they can hear BTS songs on a regular basis or other K-pop artists if they did that. There are things they could be doing right now to keep that audience, but it's as if they're not trying. I don't know why.
Yeah.
We're going to come back next week with part 2 of my interview with Jimmy Rodriguez here on the Broadcasters Podcast. And we'll have more to go and talk about. A lot of things will probably happen between now and next week. Until then, remember that content is king and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.